Samupe, Sampa Dietia, Chimafidi non kotu, era one radio. Samupe, Jumpa Dietia, Chimafidi non kotu, era one radio. Oh, and you punctua, Asam punctua.
They are four women. They are beautiful with brains. They are eloquent, decent, wise, and experienced. You have heard many, the funny. Now, it's time to hear the experience and the brainy. Meet Selena, Dorcas, Gifty, and Annette as they present the real in common getting. In common BISS chain, a dead, as in Takrenu assume the dead, the real in common getting. Showing live this and every Sunday, 7 p.m. on Era One Radio on Facebook and on YouTube, Era One Radio and on Taibo channel. Kaise, so we see the real in common getting ya. What brabon tete, we nyan konkonsa, we the real in common getting.
Hello, good evening, Era One Radio listeners and viewers all over the world. It's another Tuesday, the 18th day of March 2025. Of course, every Tuesday means we have divine connection on the Era One Radio Network. On behalf of my studio manager, Dr. Setutu, and the network, I bring you greetings from East Coast of the United States of America. Well, tonight I have Nisaba in the studio. Unfortunately, Professor Redu couldn't join us because of what is going on with network and all over Ghana. So
Dumso in Ghana.
Well, I don't want to mention that word.
It's
a technical issue. I mean, it's going to come back. I mean, they're working around it, so he might join us in if he comes up. Otherwise, we are well able. I mean,
there is Dumso in Ghana.
Well, Dumso is going on.
Mahama is back, so Dumso is back.
I didn't say that. It's not synonymous. It's just
you heard me.
It's just coincidental. It's just coincidental. It's just coincidental. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about Dumso tonight. We're talking about Proverbs 6:6-8. Professor Oredu was going to lead us in the kamikaze ants. I don't know exactly how fiery it's going to be, but unfortunately, as Professor Nisaban will say, Dumso. But anyway, well, we are well able. Well, this is the One Show. This is Divine Connection, where divinity meets humanity. Well, we're going to do something. If you want to call us, it's 240-280-2633, or you can text us as usual, 510-931-0946. All right, so tonight I'm going to put Pastor Akon in the hot seat because either of us didn't prepare because we knew Professor Redu was going to carry the day, but unfortunately, stuff happened. So Pastor Akon will shoulder everything. I'll be here watching him. All right, Pastor Akon, we've been dealing with Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6-8. We dealt with the ant story. Mama is God. We did Sleep and Live and a few others. Tonight we're going to do kamikaze. Well, in the absence of that, we are going to take that scripture and we're going to see how we can flip it around. So let me read it quickly and then we'll go over. Of course, you know that every Bible student should know that. Proverbs 6:6-8. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Unfortunately, I read NIV, but Pastor Kwan will read his King James and we'll take it from there. All right, sir, fire it away.
Thank you, Dr. Boison.
You're welcome.
You viewers and listeners, sorry, Professor Redu has run into a familiar problem in Ghana, power problems. So I'm standing in for him. Well, our scripture for the night, Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6-8. This is wise King Solomon talking. Says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider the ant's ways and then become wise, which, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provides her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. This is the King James. Dr. Boison, there is an interesting feature about this text, right? And I'm going to use one of the very, call it, useful concepts to deal with this text. I'm going to create what we call an ontology for this text. So an ontology deals with a domain of knowledge or domain of interest. So this particular text, the domain of interest, we'll call it the wisdom the ant manifests or symbolizes. The wisdom the ant symbolizes. That's the domain of knowledge or of interest. And what King Solomon has done here is to identify some properties of certain ideas, call them containers. So with ontologies, and their spelling is ontology, ontology. With an ontology which mines the body of knowledge with respect to a domain of knowledge, you have three things, what we call the concepts or the classes. Then you have the properties, and then which actually technical, we call them roles. And then you have other things that go with it. So you have your concepts, you have your roles, and then you have your properties. So let's take the classes. Words in this text that will be considered classes or containers are the word ant itself, because it's a class that contains different individuals, right? Individuals or individual ants. The next word is sluggard. Sluggard is like a human being who is lazy, or a lazy human being. And that also becomes a container for all lazy people. Then the third, Dr. Boison, is what I will call the ant ways, which will be the industry of the ants. And then the fourth container will be wisdom, because Solomon says, be wise. So the goal of watching or considering the ants' ways is to become or to acquire wisdom. Another word that we'll consider as a container is the word guide. Guide is a word that means somebody who provides, call it leadership, sort of, or protects, right? Or leads another individual. So that also will call a container, because different individuals can fit into that role, that class. Then we have overseer. people who will be, we will call supervisors in any group. Then you have ruler. Ruler has to do more with, call it, political governance over a people, right? That also will form a class, because it is a role that different individuals can, call it, a play. And then you have the word meat, which will be synonym for food, right? You have all kinds of food. So you have meat representing hard food substances, right? And then you have the word summer, which will be the time when, or call it ideal time, right? So summer itself, we'll consider it a container, a class. Then food, a class, and then finally harvest, time when things that have been sown actually come to fruition, harvest time. Dr. Boison, having identified all these containers or classes, right, one thing comes to mind. The way to look at it is to borrow from the field of mathematics. And the topic area will be set theory. So you have, in set theory, every set may or may not contain elements, right? So each class in an ontology is the equivalent of a set in mathematics, right? You can combine some of the elements to become subset of the parent set. Now, the second thing to deal with here is what we call the properties. The properties in this test will be the verbs, and they call it prepositional phrases that will connect an individual to another individual. So, Dr. Boison, let's look at the way Solomon has approached this test, right? So, he says, go to the ant, thou sluggard. So, what Solomon is doing here is to take an individual in the container called sluggard and an individual in the container called ant, and then find the relationship between the two. Dr. Boison, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what Solomon is doing here is that he says the relationship between an individual in the sluggard class and an individual in the ant class is the word go. It's a verb, which actually gives us the idea of movement. And
So
it is
the go that links both of them?
Yes. The relationship between an individual sluggard and an individual ant, according to this test, is the word go, right? And the word go suggests that one moves from point A to another point B, right? So the wisdom that one gathers from this, according to Solomon, is to be able to picture a movement of one individual from wherever he or she is to where another individual is. And in this particular test, it is the lazy man who has to move to the ant. So Dr. Boison, look at what Solomon in effect is saying. One of the things we know about lazy people is what? Lack of movement. Isn't it true?
So what actually makes people lazy?
Well, it's like slow.
Is it lack of motivation?
Well, we don't know.
No vision in life?
Maybe.
Or I want to rest a little bit and it becomes
or everything that you can think of, right, as making a person lazy will qualify. And here, Solomon actually is seeing all that the lazy person does right here is movement, right? So the choice of words, the diction, actually becomes very important here. So Solomon says the relationship between a sluggard, a slow person, or a person that lacks movement, and the ant, which symbolizes purposeful movement, right? The slow person, the lazy person, has to move from his point of laziness to the domain of the ant where purposeful movement is to be found.
Pastor Akwa, I do appreciate your line of reflection. But in this contemporary times where we have technology and all that going on, would you say the lack of movement depicts laziness? Because I can sit behind my computer and balance stuff. So the laziness is not actually
not physical
translation, but it could be mental or
mostly mental, right?
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So the anything that makes you remain in the same place, revisit it, right? So physical movement actually represents more than just a person physically moving. It actually also represents a person making mental leaps.
Because you can actually move from point A to point B and do nothing, and think that you've done something.
That is why Solomon has chosen a symbol, right? The ant. You realize that the ant is constantly moving, but its movement is very purposeful, right? So Solomon says, oh, you sluggard, you belong to a container. So call the individual in the sluggard container, call him sluggard one, right? He says, sluggard one, you are the individual in the container called sluggard. Move from where you are, your container, and then go to Antoine, the individual in the ant container. And then when you go, what do you do there? Now, this is where it becomes interesting. So we move from the word go, right? Which is the relationship between two containers, the ant and the sluggard, right? Now, then Solomon now looks at another container, this time not the ant, but the ways of the ant. And the ant actually acts in different ways. So in actual fact, what Professor Uredu has been concentrating on for the last 6 weeks is the ways of the ant, right? So that is what the sluggard is going to do. The sluggard is going to consider, observe, not the ant per se, but the ways of the ant.
The qualities.
Are you understand? That means the focus is not necessarily on the ant, but what the ant does.
Not the beauty of the ant or the
No,
ugliness of the ant.
it is what the ant does
Okay.
or does not do. Are you getting me? And that's what we call the ant ways. That becomes a container, right? So now look at the way Solomon has gone about it. From the sluggard to the ant, the relationship is what? Movement, go. And then from the sluggard again to the waist of the ant, the relationship is consider. And so the meaning of the word consider is give serious thought, right? Which is to say, you are looking at something with all your faculties present. And this time, the sluggard, whose mental faculty has lacked a bit of movement, now that faculty has to engage in movement in the sense that it has to critically and carefully observe what the ant does. Not the ant per se, but what the ant does. Are we getting the picture clear? Dr. Boison, what that means in life is that you could hate somebody, but if that person displays resourcefulness, hate him all you want. You can hate this person, but learn something from what he does. Are you getting me? That is what Solomon is trying to put across. So the relationship between the sluggard and the ways of the ant is the word consideration, consider, which is a verb, right? So let's actually now begin to look at how this thing is, how Solomon is putting nuggets, rare nuggets in our plate. Relationship between containers or individuals in containers. Identify the containers, identify the classes, right? And then see how one class, an individual in one class, relates to another individual in one class. Here, the first sluggard one in the sluggard class has to move from the domain of the sluggard to the domain of the ant one in the ant domain. When he gets there, now it is the same sluggard, not the ant this time, but this time the ways of the ant, because the ways of the ant would also constitute a class by itself. And you have individual activities of the ant in that class. Are you getting me? Now, the sluggard and the ways of the ant, the relationship between the individual in the sluggard class and the individual in the ant ways class is the word consider, which is a mental activity. So look at the way Solomon is going about it. There is physical movement with go. There is mental activity with what? Consider.
When you get there.
Are you getting the picture clear? And then you move from there again, the same sluggard, right? This time is going to relate to another class, that class called wisdom. So look at
is this a lateral relationship or is just what kind of equation might that be?
Solomon is building something to a crescendo, right? Look at physical movement to mental movement, right? And then, so slowness acquires speed, which is go. right? Slowness in mind, do mental observation. And then he says, by observing thoughtfully the industry of the ant, which is the ant ways, now something happens to you, transformation, you become wise. Are you getting the picture clear? Yes. So the choice of words, the choice of terms becomes such a critical thing in this particular text. By Dr. Boison, isn't it amazing? It's the same slogan. First, the slogan relationship with the ant is movement. The second, the sluggard relationship with the ways of the ant is mental, right? And then the third, the sluggard's relationship with the highest faculty, the highest, call it, attribute of human beings, wisdom. Here it is transformation. Because he says become and be, right? And be wise, which means become, which is transformation. So let's again look at the way Solomon, you gain speed, that's go. Because first, the slugger, the word slugger simply means slow in movement, right? So for him, go. Now you go, which is a physical thing, and then you use your mind, which is consideration, which actually will mean by observing the ways of the ant, you gain knowledge. Then knowledge will transform you into what? A wise person. So be or becoming has to do with wisdom. So you see how Solomon has given us a template for moving from one stage to the other, call it information, data, what have you, to how. So Dr. Boison, let me use something journalists use. We call it our six frames.
Before you do, let's let our listeners consider who we are, and we'll come back with that thought.
Okay.
Chimafidi nunkotu era one radio. Samupe jumpe dietia. Chimafidi nunkotu era one radio. Oh, ayum pamchima. Chintu asam pamchima. Chintu ekratum chima. Era one.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to Divine Connection on the Era One Network. Before the break, Nisaba was actually educating us on the ways of the ant. The verb to go, consider, and be wise. He left out on the wise aspects. I'm going to allow him to go back. But if you want to text, it's 510-931-0946. Again, over to you, Pastor Reverend Nisaba. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Boison. So we see, I said, I'm going to use the trick of the journalist, what we call our six friends, the journalist six friends, right?
So the how,
the who,
the H, the okay,
the what,
the when,
the where, the when, the how, and the why.
Okay.
In information science, or what we call knowledge management, right? We have the first four, right? The who, the where, the when, and the what. they only take you to information. And then the how gives you knowledge. So look at what Solomon has said. Go and observe the ways of the ant. That is how the ant
operates.
So considering the ways of the ant is where you gather knowledge. And it has to do with how. Once you gather knowledge, you move from how to why. And why has to do with motivation, the motives, the reasons why somebody does what he does. So here, the sluggard has to go and learn knowledge, acquire knowledge by observing, considering the ways of the ant, the how of the ant, and then move from there into understanding the why the ant does that. And that's where wisdom comes in. Are we getting the picture clear?
Yes, sir.
Very interesting. Then the next thing Solomon does in verse 7, he says, the ant without a guide, an overseer, and a ruler, it does certain things. So let's look at them one by one. Who is a guide, or what is a guide? A guide is like a personal, right? One-on-one, somebody who helps you,
Direct.
who teaches you the ropes, right? Who guides you in certain ways, in a certain domain of activity or something, right? So it's like a one-on-one, a personal assistant type of situation, right? Guide. And then look at the next word.
Overseer.
Overseer, right? Overseer would immediately give you the idea of the presence of more than one individual. Because if the domain is made up of one individual, there is no need for an overseer. Are you getting me?
Yeah.
So the word overseer by itself presupposes that you have more than one element or individual involved. And the fact the word overseer also suggests that a certain kind of activity, be it business, be it construction, be it is taking place there with a final product in mind. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what overseer, the fact that you are overseer simply means you have others who are being overseen by the
some sort of supervisor,
right? And here Solomon is saying that the ant lacks an overseer. It doesn't have a personal assistant. It doesn't have somebody telling it what to do.
Self-motivational.
Very interesting. And then the third word is the word ruler, which has to do with governance, right? Which takes you from just a segment of activity to an entire community or domain. And that word is a political term, right? With everything that goes with it, right? So Solomon says the ant, don't forget, we go back to the ant container, right? You realize that it's no longer about the sluggard in verse 7. It is about the ant.
Mm-hmm.
But what is happening? The sluggard is observing how the ant
And
is
so,
behaving in verse 7. So for the sluggard, it is still consideration and then movement or transformation into wisdom. But
yeah, I think Solomon did a very good job, because if he had just left us in 6, he would have done us a disservice, because now
yes,
you want us to study somebody, but without giving us what we are supposed to actually go and study. So the 7 is a very paramount sentence that is.
yes, yes, you are absolutely right. Right. So Solomon says, with respect to a guy, the relationship between the ant, call it Antoine, and a guide, which is a container by itself, right? That one is the relationship is absence of whatever the guide stands for, which means the ant doesn't need it. It already has it. So the ant is its own guide. Are we getting the picture clear? The overseer, the relationship again between the ant, Antoine, and overseer, the overseer container here, the overseer one, the relationship between them is still lack or absence of whatever the overseer stands for, which means the ant is its own overseer.
So it's self-motivational. Nobody tells you what to do.
Very interesting.
I
And
mean,
then
you can't
again,
even wake up the ant in the morning and say, "Hey, go wash your face and go and
it
start
does
something."
it by itself. He knows. It has built its own routines, right? Very interesting the way Solomon is looking at this or putting this test together, right? So again, when you come to the domain of governance of a territory, right, and people, land and people, where ruler actually is the term of fashion, right? You have, again, the absence of whatever the ruler stands for as the relationship between the ant and that ruler container or class. Amazing. So again, the ant is its own guide for whatever a guide stands for. Whatever a guide symbolizes, the ant is its own symbol, right? And then whatever the overseer symbolizes, the ant is its own symbol. And then whatever a ruler symbolizes, the ant is its own ruler. The ant is its own guide, its own overseer, and its own ruler. So it doesn't need the guidance of a guide, the oversight of an overseer, and the rulership of a ruler. It is a guide, it is an overseer, and it is a ruler, all combined in itself.
So what Solomon is saying, in effect, is that this little creature can do stuff by itself, but even us human beings, we need somebody to guide us,
Yes,
oversee us, and rule
yes,
us.
yes, yes. Are you getting me? Very interesting. Again, very sophisticated way to look at it. And so, Dr. Boison, when you put this together, you realize that Solomon is talking about life in the most sensitive and most delicate ways. And then the icing on the cake, Solomon says, the ant being its own guide, being its own overseer, being its own ruler, right? That's something, right? The ant provides her meat. Meat here is food. However, since food is mentioned in the second line, we have to come up with a certain small distinction between what food, regular food, and meat, right? Meat here will be more of a metaphor, right? Meat is a harder substance than almost every kind of food, right? And meat here simply means that another creature has to die. Think about it. Think about it. So the choice of the word meat is telling, right? And so Solomon says, this small creature provides her meat in the summer season. So again, we are talking about the ants. So the class of ants represented by, call it ant one, its relationship with meat, hard food, right? The relationship between ant one and meat one, that relationship has to do with providing.
And if I may add, I think it also buttresses the fact that I'm sure the ant knows the scripture that I think it was said to Noah that as long as the earth remains, harvest, seed and harvest time will not cease. And so the ant also is very conscious about time.
Yes.
Very conscious about time. That there's a time when it can gather meat and there's a time when it can gather food. That all seasons are not the same. You have to be very sensitive about each season to do what.
And you see, the season, which actually will fall under the word time, right? The period, both harvest and summer are periods of time, right? With certain activities marking them, right? Solomon says the relationship between the ant one here and the class of meat, and again, meat is food. However, the choice of it is where now one has to see the use of that word, which will actually render that word a figurative word, right? Which means it stands for an idea bigger and deeper than one will normally think it is, right? So meat is more of something that requires a bit more sacrifice, because for you to get meat, right, the animal that gives you that meat must die.
Yeah.
Right? So meat here simply means that there must be an activity on the part of this small creature that involves the killing of another creature, most likely a bigger creature. So what will make a small-sized individual overcome a big-sized individual? What will make the underdog overcome the alpha dog?
Wisdom.
Very interesting.
You have to be wise.
You understand? Again, so as I said, Solomon, as the man of wisdom, has spoken volumes by choosing some very technical, pregnant words to represent deep ideas and concepts. Okay, so back to our study. Between the ant, the class called ant, and the class called meat, the relationship is one of gathering. What does the word gather mean? And what does it suggest? Right? It means that having a system in place to collect things from different places and maybe storing them in a particular place. That is what the word gather would suggest. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Right. So the ant must create a storage system, right? Must know where to find food,
Meat.
or here called meat, right? Where it must develop a transportation system to move the meat from wherever it gathers it to the central point where it stores it. That is what gathering, right, provided, right, here means, right? It makes available, it makes provision. Again, Dr. Boison, we have another word there, the word called summer, which will mean the time when the ant. So you move again from the container of the ant to the container called time. Right? And there, the relationship has to do with what happens within the time. And here, what happens within or during that time is the question of the ant moving to gather its supplies to its storage place when sunlight, when nature gives us the best time, when most people, the sluggard in particular, will be lazy about. So again, you see the choice of summer and the choice of meat, right? And you realize, this is Solomon at his best, right? Gathering when others are taking vacation, because summertime is vacation time, right? When others are chilling, that is when the ant is gathering, building storage, honing its skills, and then developing a transportation system to move the resources from wherever it collects to a central location. When others, the sluggard most likely, will be chilling.
Wow.
And then, right? I think, Dr. Wesley, there's a
good spot. Yeah, let me.
It's a good spot.
Thank you very much for stepping on. That is a profound teaching. Very, very profound. Let me take a quick ad and we'll be back to wrap up.
Not your typical tea. The Major Herbal Tea by Glucose International is a nutritious drink and a natural blood glucose reducer. Gymnema plant, the active ingredient, and the Major Herbal Tea suppresses the absorption of carbohydrate ingested from your diet. The green tea content in the Major Herbal Tea promotes rejuvenation of dead cells, detoxification of your system, stimulates the pancreas to release insulin, and improves metabolism. Drinking one sachet of Major Herbal Tea after meals prevents the rise in blood sugar levels, suppresses appetite, and improves bowel movements. Drinking Major Herbal Tea regularly after meals can also prevent type 2 diabetes. We encourage you to drink Major Herbal Tea 3 times in a day, coupled with mild exercises to maximize its benefits. Major Herbal Tea has been approved by the FDA. Toxicity tests conducted by SGS, so it is safe and non-toxic. A product of Singapore. But if you need your herbal tea, your peace of mind is guaranteed. Call Ashok. This is not your typical green tea. If you need your herbal tea by Lotus Care International.
Let me stop this. All right, so we're going to be wrapping up in a minute. I want to say thanks to Pastor Crom, the man I call my professor. He can take any topic and flip it around. As I always say, he takes a very simple topic, makes it very complex, confuses us, and brings it back and makes it simpler again. It's just like the eagle takes its chicks and throws them in the air as if they are going to die and grabs them back. So thank you very much for stepping in tonight. And Professor Reid was here to help us, but because of the doomsology, that wasn't possible. But God had a plan for us. I mean, God always has a plan. Even when we don't have what we expect, he makes us have a substitute that is on equal level. So thank you very much, Nisaban, for filling in awesomely. Well, I want to say thanks to our listeners, those of you who joined us tonight. The broadcast will still be on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Please share this knowledge. You wouldn't get this knowledge in any classroom. You can't find a relationship between the verb go and the ant and consideration of the ways and the time, meat and food. These relationships, we don't find them in any textbook. And I'm still waiting for Nisaban to come out with his profound book. So I know it's going to be very soon. Well, thank you very much. Both of us here have taken the Lord as our Savior and Master. So the life we live according to the love that he has for us. And so I just want to tell you that if you don't have a relationship with God, with Christ, draw closer. He always gives us an invitation because we have only one life to live. And after here, Bible says we're going to stand in the judgment seat. Well, nobody's gone there and come and told me what it is, but we know that it is possible. So thanks again to Professor Nisaban for filling him rightly. Thank you for my studio manager, Dr. Setutu, and Era One team. Thanks to all of you who took time to listen to us. As I said again, the broadcast will always be live. Nisaban, do you have any closing remarks before we leave?
Yeah, I think this ant story, right, holds quite a mountain of wisdom, right, that one can keep quarrying. and one would always come up with serious nuggets and ideas. So folks, take the trouble to do a little bit of exegesis on this text and let God reveal lots and lots of wisdom nuggets to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, until we come your way again this Thursday, stay blessed and let your life count. All right. Good night and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
C'est mon père, ça me fait bien tiens. Je me fie dire non kotu, Era One Radio. C'est mon père, je me fais bien tiens. Je me fie dire non kotu, Era One Radio. Oh, and you pam chuma, asam pam chuma. Era One, you never know